Whoever be it who stacks plates, if they be worthy, have the body of Thor. So, this isn't topical, like at all. It's actually quite out of season. I mean, I'm going to largely be talking about something that happened years ago, but might have still been slightly topical if I decided to talk about this back when Thor Love and Thunder first hit theaters, or even if I'd done it when Thor Love and Thunder first hit streaming. I didn't. I missed the window, but I still want to talk about it anyways. Partially because it's going to be my opportunity to sort of address a little bit something of a bigger issue, but look at what I think is one of the more interesting and closest to nuance that these things tend to get examples of it. So I want to talk about Fat Thor from Avengers Endgame. Now, I am going to be using the term fat fairly often in this video. Now, if you find that term offensive, I'm just giving you the heads up now. It is the term used most often by fat liberation advocates, partially to try and take the stigma off it. It's a descriptor. It's not an insult inherently, or at least it shouldn't be. And taking the stigma off that is something that we really should be striving for. But the reason I want to talk about this is because there is frankly a lot of conversation to be had in general about fat phobia in our culture, and especially our entertainment and our media. And there is just so much work being done, often by fat liberation advocates who have to advocate for themselves because even medical professionals have such a bias against those who are heavy that they will tell someone who comes in complaining of symptoms that have absolutely nothing to do with their weight to go on a diet rather than actually take their health complaints seriously. The misunderstanding and the demonization of anyone over a certain prescribed weight is a massive problem, but it's also a bigger problem than somebody like me is equipped to really tackle. And honestly, while I don't consider myself to be skinny, I'm not at a point where I think calling myself fat comes off as much more than possibly unnecessary self-deprecation. So again, I'm not thin. I'm actually close to the heaviest I've ever been, and I've been around this weight for a little while, but I'm also very happy with my body. Not that fat people can't be. They absolutely can be and should be allowed to be if they are. But my point is that I feel weird calling myself that. So this is me acknowledging I'm kind of a little bit stepping outside my lane. Now, I've done that before. I did a video on disability representation, but that was a broader overlook of some of the problems that happen with it. This, I kind of want to funnel some discussions, and it will touch on a number of points of some of the issues with some of the specific things that go on with Hollywood depictions. But this is not a broad overview. I'm filtering this specifically through the lens of Chris Hemsworth as Thor and the way he was depicted in Endgame. The first thing that I want to point out as to why I'm choosing this in particular, I kind of alluded to it before, I feel that there's actually a bit more nuance to this. And it's actually nuance that was brought to my attention by friends of mine who are fat and did actually like this. When I first saw this in the theater, I rolled my eyes at it. I was like, oh God, are we really doing this? But then people I knew would later tell me, and I'll give you some of the reasons they gave me, explain why they actually liked this. And while I don't think anybody praised it as like an amazing, great piece of fat representation in entertainment, there's still some problems with it. There are reasons to like this, despite it also exemplifying some of the classic problems. And by illustrating both where it succeeds and where it fails, I'm hoping I can kind of nudge you towards some of the bigger problems that are going on as well. But as I said, right now we're focusing in on this. So to remind you, following the events of Infinity War, where Thor took a lot of personal responsibility for his failure to kill Thanos before Thanos did the snap, he basically just sat around. He went into a depressive state and he gained a notable amount of weight in doing so. So let's deal with the elephant in the room first. they put Chris Hemsworth in a fat suit. And frankly, that is a practice that by and large really needs to go away. Putting thin or fit or just someone who isn't of that body type at all in a fat suit, especially if it is leaned on for comedy, which this frequently is in this depiction, is something that just needs to stop. Now, some people may claim, well, sometimes they need somebody for the story to look even heavier than, they would be able to find an actor for. Fine. Find a fat actor and put them in a fat suit. They're going to understand what it's like to be something closer to what they're depicting. Oh, but they're actors. They can play everything. Look, I'm not going to delve forever into the fat suit thing, but there is surprisingly, in a way, a similar issue to thin people playing fat characters in terms of what it says at a meta level subconsciously about fat people to the problem that there is with cisgender people playing transgender characters, which is that whether the narrative itself is saying it or not, there is subconsciously an instillment of the idea that fat people are really just thin people underneath. And flatly, that's a harmful idea. I know there's a lot of people out there that think it's helpful. This idea of, oh, well, there's a thin person in there just trying to get out. Look, first of all, it feeds into an automatic assumption that if somebody is over a certain body weight, they must want to not be that. And that is not a fair assumption to make. I actually brought this up when I talked about disability before in that previous video. An inclination towards tragic framing may be rooted in the perspectives of people without disabilities, viewing them from the outside. I mean, honestly, it's a bit like a straight guy saying, I don't get what's so appealing about kissing another man. Of course you don't, because you're not gay. So along those same lines, the perception of, I don't see how anyone with a disability could see it as anything other than tragic. Well, of course you can't, because it's not your life or your experience. It's a mentality that defaults to the idea that being fat is an inherently bad or undesirable thing. This contributes a great deal to fat shaming. Many of the people who do this will say that, well, we are concerned about your health. First of all, somebody else's health is really none of your business. And second of all, even if somebody had a desire to lose weight, whether it was for health-related reasons or not, they might not be able to. Some people don't have the ability or the means to do the diet and exercise to attain a lower body weight than they have. Some people's genetics are just never going to accommodate them being something that most society would accept as skinny or fit. And some people, because of their genetics, they can't get that in a healthy way. And encouraging them to do it in an unhealthy way is, unhealthy. Besides the fact that you can actually be healthy at almost any weight. But this idea that, there's really just a skinny person under there. If we worked on it, we could get them out from under all that. That is subconsciously implanted because that's what the actor is. The actor is a thinner person buried under all the stuff that can be taken off. And as I made the comparison with when cis people play trans actors, it instills the idea that trans people are really cisgender people just pretending and maybe like with makeup and wigs and all this other stuff. And it instills that idea because that's what the actor's doing. Even if it's not part of the narrative, doing that sends that as a subconscious meta piece of text. So it's just a bad thing that should stop. That having been said, there is a unique aspect to doing it here with Thor that is not at play in most instances of fat suits being used, which is 99% of the time when a fat suit is used. First of all, part of the reason they are getting a thin actor is because, well, not very many fat actors ever get used enough to become a big enough star to be considered viable to front a movie. So there's that. But in addition to that, if there were more well-established, like high profile fat actors, most of them wouldn't take these roles because they're insulting inherently. And it's a lot easier to get somebody to play an insulting role if they're not actually part of the group that's being insulted. So, that is a frequent issue with a lot of representation, whether it's intended to be comedic or not. When you cast someone who is not part of the group being represented, they are not going to know if what is being portrayed crosses a line. So there's that. And also, as I alluded to before, the vast majority of times we're dealing with the fat suit, we're dealing with comedies. And I put a pause there because, boy, is fat humor really played out and really tired and really cruel and really boring. There's 3 jokes. Oh, they're hungry even though they're so fat. Oh, they broke a chair. Or if it's exceptionally crass, oh, the fat one farted.
Oh my God! Oh, I can taste it.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of use for fat humor at this point, just because it's incredibly rare to find a fat joke not told by a fat person that isn't just the laziest stuff that we've heard a million times over. But with Thor in Endgame, it's not strictly comedic. And we'll kind of come back to the comedy level of it and what else is going on. But in regards to the use of a fat suit specifically, we have here an established character who prior to this was probably never intended to be of a body type that we see in Endgame. And so since Chris Hemsworth already is this part, then there is a better argument to be made about employing a fat suit here. There's still an argument to be had over whether this move with the character and making him fat should be happening at all. But if you are not going to hardline that, then you have to at least admit there is more cause to use it here than there is normally. Because normally, no. Normally, like, it's either just somebody in a fat suit doing awful jokes, or sometimes they'll do a similar thing to, again, trans people, where they'll be like, oh, but we need to show them back when they were skinnier, or we need to show a skinny person back when they were fat, and so we have to put them in a fat suit. And they'll say that about trans characters. Oh, but what about when we want to show them back when they weren't trans, back when they were cisgender? Why do you need that? Do you really need that? Because I would push back on the majority of times that you claim that, oh, but we have to have this. Do you? Do you really? How much funnier, quote unquote, was Just Friends for the clumsy, awkward, fat jokes that existed for the flashbacks with Ryan Reynolds in a frickin' fat suit? I mean, I suppose you could argue they weren't much less funny than the rest of the movie was, but at that point, you just got to say scrap the whole thing, which would not have been a bad idea, all things considered. But anyways, so that's kind of getting to why I want to talk about this. There's a lot more nuance here that I think allows for some exploration of why there are some rules of thumb that probably should be obeyed as we examine maybe why not all of them apply here, or at least what the argument could be for them to not apply here. Now, I did say that this is an issue of Thor being depressed, and this is actually another little bit of an issue. While depression eating is very much a thing, and it can contribute to weight gain, it's not the sole cause, and Hollywood has a tendency to go to overeating as a form of depression as a little bit of a go-to image. And that's not super helpful either. Because again, it implies that, well, there's something wrong. That's why someone is fat. As opposed to just, having a fat person every now and then. No, there must be a reason they are this way. And sometimes there is. Sometimes it's medical. Sometimes it even is connected to depression. That is something that can happen. I'm not going to say that it can't or never does happen. But it doesn't happen in the proportion that it gets depicted.
I can't stop eating. I eat because I'm unhappy. And I'm unhappy because I eat.
This is part of why, and I'm sure Brendan Fraser is great in it. I don't doubt that. It's part of why I have zero interest in the upcoming Oscar bait movie, The Whale. I have no interest in this because I've read the synopsis, and I have no interest in seeing an actor buried in a fat suit to depict someone who is depressed and eating himself to death. The acting could very well be excellent. I've heard it is. And I like Brendan Fraser. I hope he gets a legitimate career resurgence on the back of this. I have no interest in this movie. Stop doing that. So that's another issue that's kind of something of a problem with Thor being this way because of depression, which again, can and does happen. But it is such a go-to instance and example of why someone gains weight in Hollywood that it's kind of unhelpful and unhealthy to continue to depict it as regularly as they do. Even in things like, frankly, Just Friends or, the show Friends with Monica flashbacks, there's often this implication that they were more depressed when they were fat and they're in some ways, if not always, in some ways happier now. That's usually pretty common in those depictions. Again, linking it with depression, which, yes, fat people can be depressed, but one does not necessarily follow on from the other. We all have reasons to be depressed. Now, the depression contributing to something of a slovenly appearance on the part of Thor, where he's a little bit greasy, a little bit food-stained, that makes more sense as a general thing. It is fairly common for people who are depressed to not take as much interest in their own appearance, partly just for lack of energy or a feeling that there's no point. But unfortunately, that paired with the weight gain does this linking of slovenliness to one's weight, which is another super overplayed thing frequently for comedy. And speaking of the comedy in Endgame specifically, it doesn't help that pretty much none of the humor is allowed to originate from Thor himself, and it's pretty much all quips made by his quote-unquote friends. And the reason I put that in quotes is they make quips and jokes about his weight gain while ignoring the fact that, as presented in this specific instance and framing, that weight gain is a manifestation of deeper issues, almost none of which these characters are bothering to delve in or take any consideration of. Hulk seems to be the most thoughtful in regards to this, but we get a whole lot of stuff like this.
What do you think is coursing through my veins right now?
Cheese whiz?
And that's not to say no jokes could be made at his expense by other people. Tony Stark has a decent one when he refers to Thor as Lebowski.
Inside there, Lebowski.
Because yeah, he looks more than a little bit like the dude from The Big Lebowski. That's fair. But most of the other jokes and references are cheap shots.
You look like melted ice cream.
So those are kind of the core reasons why I had an initial gut reaction to it. But I said that I've had friends, like not just casual people, people I know who genuinely liked this. So I feel like I should express some of the reasons that were explained to me that, yeah, actually make a fair bit of sense. Part of it has to do with one specific thing that Endgame did not do. And that is that when Thor gets Mjolnir again and starts using these weapons again, it doesn't immediately change him back. His weight had nothing to do with his worthiness, and in fact, he even says,
I'm still worthy.
I actually really love this entire interaction that he has with his mom, where she clearly can tell something is wrong, but she never brings up his weight. And I was so prepared to go off on how great that is until this line was slipped in at the very end.
Eat a salad.
And I'm extra annoyed at that because since she's not facing the camera, there's a very good chance that that was a drop-in line added after the fact. But sorry, positive. We're doing the positives right now. It would have been so easy with the idea that once he gets like the original Mjolnir hammer back in his hand, that it's just going to revert him. And that would have been awful. Instead, in the entire final fight, he kicks just as much butt. He actually has no moment that even implies his fighting ability or his heroism is in any way impaired by the state of his body. And that's great. Like, honestly, if we didn't have the fat suit issue and the fact that the character used to be skinny and that it's implied that depression has caused the weight gain, if we remove that and just deal with him in the climax, you have a fat superhero doing amazing things, incredible things, heroic things, applaudable things, kicking ass, looking cool, being fat while he does it. That's what we need more of. And it'd be amazing if it wasn't tied to all the other stuff that I've already talked about. But that also brings up me to the other thing that some people said, which is some people, again, including some friends of mine, like Fat Thor because they now have a cosplay character of a hero, a superhero, a canon superhero that they can cosplay as. Because normally, if you are a fat cosplayer, you are either restricted to a very small number of characters, or you're seen as a variant. You're not seen as authentically cosplaying because you are the fat version of blah, whatever it is you happen to be cosplaying. Now, not everyone's going to be that rude about it, but that's generally how you're perceived. You're perceived as not really embodying the character. But Fat Thor's canon. That's not an alternate version of Thor. That's Thor. I have friends who have told me with absolute joy in their voices that they get to go around Comic-Con with like the robe and the tank top and just be themselves, not feel like they have to suck in a gut or, you know, have to hide who they are or be ashamed of who they are because they are that character. They get to just look like how he looked on screen and it's fine. People love it. They think it looks great. And I would never want to take that away from them because there's precious little options where you aren't viewed as some alternate fat version of a character as opposed to just being, hey, it's the character. I recognize that. Exactly. Good cosplay. And also relatively easy cosplay if you've got a bathrobe and you just got to get the sunglasses, the hammer, either grow or put on a beard and like you're pretty much done. And it was in hearing stories like that that really gave me a better appreciation of why something like this, for all the problems that it has, can still have some value. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it still bring something that was missing from the MCU? Yeah, it did. Until Thor: Love and Thunder came out. Now, I'm actually on the record as being one of the few people on the internet who apparently liked Thor: Love and Thunder. This is my review right up there. But I will admit it was disappointing to see, as part of a montage, Thor, well, as Korg puts it,
he went from dad bod to god bod.
I do appreciate that it is made clear that he did have to put in the work for it. And again, it wasn't just magically dissolved, and it gives an impression that if you're going to try and lose that weight, yes, there is serious work, and we're not just going to gloss over it, because that's another thing that I kind of skipped over with a lot of the fat suit stuff, especially when there's a before and after sense, and the after is the skinny version that's just the actor how they normally are. You almost never see that journey, ever. Instead, you just see them skinny, and then you see them in the fat suit, and it's like, oh boy, that was too bad. Oh, this is so much better, and they don't show the work, which gives this impression of, oh, how hard could it be? They went from that to this? Great, awesome. Like, no. It's a montage, granted, but it's made clear he put in the work. That's good, but I really wish they hadn't done that. And to be clear, I'm not even going to say that they should have kept him in the fat suit because, like I said, there's problems with that. But you know what would have been really cool? If they just, let Chris Hemsworth let go a little bit. If they didn't insist he go on the workout regimen that they've made him do for every single one of these movies, and they just let him be whatever he's going to be. Like, still muscular, still buff, but, you know, maybe with a little bit of fat in front of the abs. You know, maybe something in the neighborhood of David Harbour. That would have been amazing. That would have been incredible. And story-wise, there's no reason to not do that. There's no narrative reason why he's this buff again. And it doesn't really help that while we do have another character who could probably be described as fat, that being Zeus, I don't think Russell Crowe has a fat suit in that. He might. If he does, all previous complaints apply. But even if he doesn't, the one other fat guy we see is depicted as uncaring, a jerk, self-centered, just not a good guy. So that doesn't help either. I think it would have been the coolest damn thing if they just let Chris Hemsworth look as much like a normal person as Chris Hemsworth is going to look like. And like I said, still have the muscles, the good shoulder muscles, but like not zero body fat, ripped, super exaggerated abs. Let him have a dad bod. And I don't even know how comfortable I am with that phrase. I have mixed feelings about it, but like, you understand what I mean when I say that. Let him just have it. How cool would it have been if when Zeus did that flick and his clothes flew off and he just had not this completely unattainable body and everybody still fainted from how hot he was? I think that would have been incredible. I would have praised that forever. I'm not going to because it didn't happen. And it really does, unfortunately, undercut some of the value that was there in Endgame because it turns it into a one-off. It says that, okay, well, while we were okay letting him be heroic while being fat, we're past that now. We don't want that for him anymore. It's an admission that it's unappealing and not allowable as a norm. It would have been really cool if they just let it be the new norm for Thor. And again, like I said, not necessarily the fat suit, but just a little bit of fat on the guy. That's going to go down as a major missed opportunity for representation. And yes, fat representation is a thing. And again, that's not necessarily something I'm going to do a deep dive on because I'm not sure how well equipped I am to deal with it. But like seeing people like yourself and seeing them get to be something other than only one thing. So in the case of a lot of fat people, getting to see them be something other than a punchline or other than a tragic story of depression, that has value. Most people do not, never will, and can't ever look like Chris Hemsworth looks in anything other than how he looked in Endgame. If only for the fact that they are not being paid, literally paid, to work out 6 hours a day with a physical trainer for months in lead up to a film. People have jobs. They have limited budgets. They can't eat that lean. They don't have that free time. They don't have that kind of energy. They have as much right to have a superhero that looks at least a little like them. Just one. So those are my somewhat rambling thoughts on Fat Thor and sort of using it to touch on some of the overall issues with body depictions in Hollywood especially, but kind of media in general. And I have a very strong feeling I am going to be deleting a lot of comments because I've heard them all. Much like I've heard the 3 things said to every trans person, and I delete those comments as well. All the "you'll never be a woman," "you're a threat to women," "you're a groomer." Like I've heard it. Change the record. I delete it. I know all the standard things that are said to fat people. Again, not from experience. They're generally not said to me. So I'm not trying to say I've heard it directed at me, but like I've heard all of the, it's okay to bully you because we're trying to encourage you to be better. You're going to die. We're concerned about you. You're not concerned about fat people. You want them to feel shame because you don't like looking at them. They don't have to feel shame. Fat shaming does not and has never helped anybody lose weight. It just makes them feel terrible about themselves. And people who feel terrible about themselves rarely feel motivated to make major life changes. They just sink into depression. So you're not helping anybody with comments like that. You're just being a cruel dickhead. And I'll delete your comments if you're going to try and do that. So with that understanding, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's what pays the bills around here. Allows me to do this as my living. And if you can help out in any amount, it does allow me to pay my bills and keeps me fed. But even if you can't, like, share, subscribe, that helps out as well. But what I really want you to remember is that no matter your size, no matter your body, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. End credits. That means I need to shout out my top Patreon supporters. Robin Moore, Zupin Lutfula, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Linda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Renabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shay Lagourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name in the credits too by checking out the rewards on the Patreon. You only tried to eat my earring once this time. That's much better.